that, man, we have to be faithful in the moments that God gives us so that when that Goliath moment happens, we're ready for it. We've put in the work, we've practiced, we've done those things, we've had that experience, we've had those opportunities, and God's been preparing us up to that moment. This is the Church of Now podcast. We appreciate you listening, and our prayer today is that we can bring insight to help you become a better leader no matter what generation you're a part of. Hey, welcome back. Hope you enjoyed the podcast last episode with Mike and McGee. What a great conversation we had. He's a youth minister up in Delaware, and one of my good friends. And so hopefully you enjoyed that. Today I want to talk a little bit about this story. It's the story of David, but there's something very practical that I think we can take away from the story of David, and I'm going to try to summarize it as much as I can and not go into all the details. But many of you all, will know the story of David, and specifically David and Goliath. And I think we may have talked about this on this podcast before, uh, but David didn't go fight Goliath without any preparation. Like if you looked throughout David's life, his childhood, his upbringing, he had been preparing for this moment for a really, really long time. And so whenever he goes out to fight Goliath, it's not like he didn't have experience. It's not like he didn't have preparation that he really needed. Like he had those things. It looked a little bit different than what he was about to go and experience, but he had those things. Like he had fought off lions, right? He had fought off bears. Like he had done those things before. And also, I mean, he was a shepherd. He was a shepherd, which in that day and age, may not have been the most popular person in the world, or the most powerful person in the world, but man, he was someone who knew how to take care of animals, take care of people. And so he had the experience of being a shepherd, of making sure all the animals were taken care of. He had experience with using a sling. He had to use a sling in order to take care of those animals. And so he was developing those practical skills. He was using those weapons that he would eventually go on to defeat Goliath with, pretty much in his day-to-day life. Like that was just normal for him. He would have to practice those things. He would do those things over and over again. And so, man, I think there's a lot for us to learn here because we always look at how cool it is that David goes out and defeats Goliath. And, oftentimes we're surprised by, man, how does that young man, that young teenager do those things? Well, it wasn't like he wasn't prepared. Now, again, he may not have been prepared to do it the way that it happened. He may not have been prepared to fight a giant man. He's never done that before. But the skill set and the practical things of getting to that moment in time, they were there. They were there. And so, what an incredible story that God uses a young man, the one that many wouldn't have chosen. God uses a young man who was brave and he was courageous to step into this position, and do this. Like that's a great story that God would use him. And oftentimes we think that we're David in the story, and I think we may have talked about this before, but it's not us as we look at this picture and this portrayal or this imagery of illustration in the story. It's not us as David. We're more of the Israelites on the front lines watching as David, or the picture would be of Jesus fighting the battles for us. And then whenever he wins the battle, we follow after him with all that we have, and we go forward. So that's kind of the main theme that I see in the David and Goliath story. But we can learn so much from David because as he goes and does this incredible act, he didn't do it without a plan. He didn't do it without experience. He didn't just step in one day and be like, you know what, I'm going to go do this. Now, that's kind of how it unraveled, but like he didn't plan on going out there that day to kill Goliath, but he did have an idea of what he was doing when he did it. You see what I mean? And so David and Goliath, they're in the valley. He brings out that slingshot and he puts the rock through his forehead, right? That's the story that we all know and love. But I think we can relate this to our modern day too, because oftentimes we want those special moments. We want those special things in life where those big opportunities come, those things happen. But so many times we don't do the prep work in order to get there. And sometimes we don't, we can't fault ourselves for that. Maybe those opportunities, those experiences haven't come yet. Uh, but oftentimes in our walk with Jesus, we always want to have that David and Goliath moment, but we don't want the shepherd moment and really the consistent shepherd moments in order to get to the David and Goliath moment. And so, what does that look like for you and me? What does it really look like? Because, we oftentimes want that glory. We want those big things to happen. We want God to use us in incredible ways, and people will see that we're doing some really cool things. And oftentimes, I believe that we have a really good heart when we want to do some really big things for the Lord. Uh, but what I've experienced throughout my life and my leadership in church and ministry is it's not always the big things, it's often the day to day. It's often the day to day. And so, really, the thing that I want to hit home on this, and we're going to keep this short today, is this that, man, we have to be faithful in the moments that God gives us so that when that Goliath moment happens, we're ready for it. When that Goliath moment happens, the big thing, the big reveal, the big moment, when that comes to be, we're ready for it. We've put in the work, we've practiced, we've done those things, we've had that experience, we've had those opportunities, and God's been preparing us up to that moment. And man, what a hard thing to realize sometimes. You want that moment. You want that thing. And sometimes when that doesn't happen, you start to wonder and you start to question. But it just goes back to kind of that hindsight or really thinking before, which is hard to do. Oftentimes we get to the other side of that moment and we can see the hindsight of it, but we kind of have to prepare ourselves before that big moment comes, before that job comes, before that career comes, before that whatever comes. And we have to look ahead and say, man, if I want to be there, I need to backwards plan a little bit and really stay faithful in the moment. Because God's going to call us to whatever He calls us to, but He's also calling us every single day to do just like what David did, to be that shepherd, to be that young man who was faithful as a shepherd, who put in the work and put in the practice of using that slingshot, of defending the sheep, defending in our church context, the sheep would be the people, defending God's people from the attacks from Satan and the attacks of this world. And man, David was faithful. He trusted that God was going to use him. He trusted that God was going to use him in big ways. And he doesn't just leave David in that moment of David and Goliath. After he defeats Goliath, he gives him a really, really big platform down the road. And again, we know that he struggles in some areas there, as we all do. But man, God, even after that struggle with Bathsheba, still used David in a big way. And so here's what we want to nail down on today is that we have to be faithful in the little things before the Goliath moment comes. So that when that Goliath moment comes, and it's going to be special, and God, hopefully, God gives everybody that moment where you really see God at work and He's really using you. We just got to back up, be patient, be faithful. And I know it's hard. It's not the easiest thing for us to do. But if we're going to be good leaders, then it's not just about the big moments, it's about the little ones. It's about the day to day, it's about those things. That's where you impact the sheep. That's where you impact the people the most, is in that day to day work. Yes, that Goliath story is an incredible one, but it was just one moment. But what David did the days before that, the years before that, was protect and do the job that God called him to do. And so, hey, stay faithful, stay prepared, look for those opportunities to stay faithful and execute those well. Execute those the way that God wants you to use them and do them. Because when you do that, He sees that we're faithful. And the Bible says that when we're faithful with little and we're faithful with more and more, He's going to give us more and more. So be faithful. It's hard, but God's preparing you. He's preparing you for that moment, for that next thing. And sometimes we want that next thing to happen today, but God sometimes has different plans, and that's okay. And so while we're in the middle of it, while David was in the middle of protecting the sheep, he may not have realized in that moment that he was going to defeat Goliath. And you may not realize what God's about to do in your life, but just stay faithful where you are. That's all we can do. Hey, hope that you keep listening to the podcast. Over the next couple of weeks, we're going to have more guests on. If you didn't get a chance to listen to Micah's guest appearance on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, make sure you go and do that. But also, if you want to dive deeper into this Church of Now idea, go and buy the book. It's on Amazon. It's $10. It's an easy read. You can probably read it in 2 hours or less. And so, the way that I structured the book is very few words on each page, short book, so that it's easy for you to read. That's how I like to read, so I wanted to write it the way that I would read it. So make sure you do that. But this David and Goliath thing, Church of Now, just be faithful now where you are. Go buy the book, dive in, keep listening to the podcast, share the podcast. If you would, please rate and review it and share it with people because that really makes a difference. Hey, we'll see you here in a couple weeks.